Well, it's not the easiest thing in the world because his contract is so large.
Yeah.
Like that's ultimately what it comes down to. Just like mechanically, there are so few assets out there league wide that, or at least singular assets, where you can match his salary and then accept the picks, basically, or that you want to match his salary with that player, because obviously most of the players in the league that have that high end salary end up being guys that are max level players. And at one time, Russell Westbrook was a max level player. Unfortunately, he is not that guy really anymore, but it creates a very difficult spot where you have to kind of, add up contracts to where you have to get to it. And like the Jazz one is interesting, like Boyan, Jordan Clarkson, Pat Beverly, like you can kind of add up the deals that you need to make those kind of situations work, because of the deal that they accomplished for Rudy Gobert, because someone wanted Rudy. And unfortunately, it doesn't feel like a lot of teams want Russ at his current salary. I'm glad that you brought up the idea of LeBron's deal, having them go 1 for 2 now, because it feels like, from the reporting at the very least, that the Kyrie Irving chase is largely in part being pushed by LeBron. That is what the media reporting tells you. And just to be honest, like, I've been on vacation. I haven't really tried to do a lot of reporting on my end on this to see. So I'll just ask you, does it feel that way? Does it feel like to you that LeBron is kind of pushing the Kyrie Irving chase, as opposed to the front office potentially trying to push for the Kyrie Irving chase?
Yes. Yes, that is my understanding, from what I've been told. I think LeBron is aware that they need to improve the roster. I think most people would agree on that the roster isn't where they would want it to be for them to truly contend. And I think looking at the options, I don't think it's, going out on a limb to say the Kyrie Irving trade is the trade that I think would move the needle the most for them. You're getting back a top 15, top 20 at worst player, at least offensive talent. And, again, I think depth would still be an issue for this team. But when you have 3 top 20 guys, we've seen that work historically. And I think, Kyrie just fits so much better than Russell Westbrook. Even if it ends up, it probably wouldn't be a 1 for 1, but even if it was just kind of principally a 1 for 1, just his fit. We've seen it with LeBron already, but I'm just imagining Kyrie AD pick and rolls and just the options that you would have there, and his ability to, one of the things that the Lakers really struggled with last year was, second consecutive season that LeBron and AD were both injured for almost half the year, and Russ wasn't able to carry the load the way he has in the past. Like, that was part of the appeal of bringing in Russ, was like, okay, if LeBron's out, if AD is out, Russ can slide up, be that second guy, even be the focal point in some scenarios, and carry us the way he's carried mediocre supporting cast in OKC or Washington, or helped in Houston. But he didn't do that last year. They were 20 and 32 in games that LeBron and or AD missed that Russ played in. So they were, basically that translates to their record of 33 and 49. They basically won at the same rate. And Russ, his numbers weren't dramatically better without those guys. So I think, I think that they're in an interesting spot because they have to get better. And I think we know LeBron has a track record of never, not being complacent, never really being happy with the roster, always tinkering and wanting to make improvements. And I think, Kyrie has expressed an interest in playing in LA, earlier in the offseason. And I think now he's kind of walked that back a little bit and is being a good soldier. And I think is content with staying in Brooklyn possibly. But I think if he does leave Brooklyn, LA makes the most sense. LA is probably the most interested suitor. And he has previously had an interest in playing in LA and playing with LeBron again. So I think part of that extension, part of the talks with that was certainly strategy and how, what's the next step for us? How are we going to build out this team? And LeBron getting on board with that. So, because I had heard, I'd basically been hearing for weeks that he's going to sign the extension. It's just a matter of when. But there's also kind of the leverage play of it, of LeBron doesn't, I think LeBron lost some leverage with the front office with the Russ trade and just the way that that was such an epic failure. And he was one of the driving people behind that, and ultimately signed off on it. So I think there's been kind of a loss of leverage there a little bit. And, part of him regaining some of that was having this contract extension and kind of having that dangling carrot there. So I think, I don't think, I also think LeBron is cognizant of what's being reported and what's out there and his image. And we know he's very calculated. So I don't think he would ever kind of strong arm them to that extent. But I think he's made it clear he wants Kyrie Irving. He wants the roster to get better. If they can't get Kyrie, get something that improves this team. So that's, I think, going to be the mission over the next month or so before training camp.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the idea of Russ being the guy that was supposed to carry the load when Anthony Davis and LeBron missed games. I was with that. I actually was ready to bet on the Lakers over. I don't know if I was ready to bet on the Lakers over win total last year, but I was like, look, if there's anything Russ can do, Russ can just stem the tide for them. They'll be fine as long as one of those two guys is on the court with Russ. It'll be fine in the regular season, and then I would kind of sell them in the playoffs. But in the regular season, I thought it would be fine, and it ended up not being that, and it ended up being kind of a disaster. And it leaves Russ in a fascinating situation. Now, Russ obviously had a very public, I don't even want to say falling out necessarily, public parting of the ways with his agent, Thad Fouché, earlier this offseason. And in a move that I've just never seen in a high profile agent pull out before, Thad Fouché said that he and Russ just have very different opinions on where Russ's career is going. And he explained why. And in large part, it was that Thad thought that Russ should want to stay in LA and try and make it work there. Can you ever remember an agent doing something like that? Because I can't. That was wild.
And I've talked to people around the team, around the league, and no one could recall anything this public.
Yeah, that was pretty insane. And I talked about it briefly on the show with Fred Katz when we talked about Russ. I thought it was not a move that an agent should pull, especially one that has been with Russ for over a decade, has made a lot of money with Russ, has really done quite a good job of representing his best interests over the course of his career. And more importantly, in the case of Russ, a guy that likes to be a very private individual. You essentially just blew up the spot of a guy that, if we know anything about Russ, it's that he absolutely adores his privacy. He wants as little information out there about him as possible. And I just didn't, that didn't sit super well with me. But in terms of the way that it impacts where this goes moving forward, where is Russ at this point? Do we have any idea what Russ wants, where he sees his career as, where all of this goes for Russ moving forward? Because that's what I'm kind of struggling with. Is there a spot where he can go and be a starting regular season point guard? And is there a spot that works for him that makes sense? Does the team that acquires him just end up buying him out at the end of the day? I'm trying to figure out what the end game is here for Russ in a way that is a bit difficult, I think, right now.
Yeah, well, and I think the other interesting part of that whole situation is Thad himself is someone who is very private. And, I think you obviously know a lot of agents. And, when I got my break, first break, started covering the Clippers, they had Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who was rep by Thad. And that was kind of the feedback I got right away, is this isn't someone who, he's not really interested in the fraternizing and sort of, playing the news game and all that stuff, or speaking to reporters and all. He's just been kind of a private behind the scenes guy. So I think for him to come out with a statement that publicly, obviously the relationship ended on not great terms. And I think for him to feel the need to do that, You got to think it was pretty ugly behind the scenes for that
Yeah.
to be his reaction. Cause I think that was obviously calculated, but I also think it was an emotional reaction to the situation. He might probably in shock. Like I never thought I thought I would be his agent for his whole career. And things got to a point where, cause I think mutual parting of ways, like essentially it's typically a firing, but like a nice way of saying a firing, more often than not. Right. I mean, there's
Yeah.
or at least one party wants it more than the other. Maybe both sides are ready to move on, but like it's very rarely a 50-50 divorce in the NBA.
Right.
So I think that was interesting, but I think if we just look at like, there's been a lot of speculation on Russ and sort of what does he want, what's going on, but like if we just go by what we know and what is factual and indisputable, I mean, go back to his exit interview. He basically threw everybody under the bus. He threw the organization under the bus. He threw Frank Vogel under the bus. He threw LeBron and AD under the bus. He threw the fan base under the bus. Like it was basically just shots at everybody. And some of them were a little more veiled, but like he made it clear, like, he was kind of burning the bridge on the way out. Like it was very shocking to see the way that he conducted himself in that exit interview. And like, for those who have not seen it, I would go to YouTube and watch it. And like, I feel like it didn't get as much of attention as it probably should have. That was because the playoffs were starting and like, we're talking about the Vogel firing and stuff. But like that to me was like very kind of eyebrow raising press conference. Then he, has the non-interaction with LeBron at Summer League. I sat right behind LeBron. Just so happened that's where I was seated. He comes in right before the buzzer, sits there, and I'm seeing everybody come up to this guy like he's the Godfather. And Rob Pelinka, Darvin Ham, all the players in attendance, and the one guy who doesn't come up is Russell Westbrook, who leaves on the opposite end of the floor at halftime. And then you have a few days later, he fires his agent, and his agent releases the statement that he released, which, reading between the lines of the statement, was essentially like Russ doesn't have the self-awareness to accept where he's at currently and where the league views him at currently. And he's likely going to be traded. Although now you have to attach assets versus in the past when you were getting assets for giving up assets to get Russ. And essentially kind of implicated like Russ doesn't want to be in LA. Russ wants to be, Russ wants a fresh start. He wants to be somewhere else. And he thinks if he pushes for a trade, it's going to be like, the perfect situation for him going somewhere else where realistically anyone who trades for him is probably going to try to buy him out. So I think just going off of that, like it's not optimistic. And from what I've heard recently, he still wants out and does not want to be, a Laker ideally. I don't think he has interest in, Darvin Ham has kind of almost talked about like this Drew Holiday-esque role of like, he's the captain of the defense and he's going to be a defense first player. And, that they're going to figure out different ways to use him without the ball in his hands. And like a lot of that stuff was also similar to what Frank Vogel said last training camp and going, media day. So I'm, count me skeptical until I see Russ do that and do that. Not only do it, but like do it consistently. Cause at the beginning of last season, I think he was a little bit passive, a little bit, okay, I'm going to kind of fit in. And then quickly within the first 5 to 10 games, he reverted to, I'm going to play the way I've always played. And I'm Russ. So I guess from what I've heard, I think he still wants out. And I think there's just a matter of, there's not really much of a market for him. And, the market is dictating that the Lakers give up a couple of picks, and they've been hesitant to do that, especially for non-needle moving, moves. In aside from the Kyrie trade, I don't think they really view any of these moves as needle making. So, or needle moving. So I think it's in a tough spot, but I think both sides are ready to move on. I don't think there would be much love lost on either side. And that's why I think the LeBron extension and kind of some of the stuff that's trickled out since then indicates to me that they are eventually going to move Russ and probably around the start of training camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that is the best piece of evidence that Russ doesn't really want to be there is just the Fouché statement, right? At the end of the day, Thad Fouché basically said that Russell Westbrook wants a trade. And that's where I was like a little bit fucked up with it, because I was like, wait, this is a very private guy, and you just like put on blast that he kind of wants out. And that wasn't really public information anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure that you were hearing that behind the scenes, but that publicly, that was not like a widely available piece of information. Am I wrong about that?
No, no. I mean, I do think like there aren't many signs he wants to be there either.
Sure.
Again,
Yeah.
because he had the whole thing where he deleted all his posts on Instagram, and I guess had the one video where he was wearing a Laker, saying one of one or whatever he said. But yeah, I mean, I think again, and look, there's two sides to every story. We haven't gotten Russ's side. I'm sure he has a different version of events, and um, you know, I'm sure he'll be asked about it at media day wherever he is, be it LA or a new situation. But I don't think we're gonna get much from him. So all we have to go on is that. And again, like I want to give Russ the benefit of the doubt, and I want to take what Dad said with a little bit of a grain of salt. But at the same
Yeah.
time, from everything I know about him, he isn't one of these guys that really plays the game and is trying to get attention to himself, and is he's not really sitting courtside chopping it up with a bunch of media people. Like, that's just not how he operates. So for him to come out with a statement that was so shocking and so public, like that to me was again partly a sign, but also a sign of like he's just letting the clip fly of like, this is actually what like this is the truth. I'm just letting it all out, and almost like talking to Russ kind of through the media of like, hey, if you won't listen to me and you're still trying to force your way out and find a new situation, I'm just going to publicly out it and hope that gets through to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never seen anything like that. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again,
I don't
but
know if we will either.
it was pretty crazy.
The difference, so you mentioned the name Drew Holiday, which is the name that Darvin Ham has brought up, obviously having been a former assistant coach with the Milwaukee Bucks. Frank Vogel has brought up the idea of this before. Here's the difference. Drew Holiday shot 41% on pull-up threes last year. Like, Drew Holiday,
we're not even talking defense either. Like,
yeah, we're not talking defense yet.
There's a giant gap there.
There's a chasm there, but like, just fundamentally, it's a different player at the end of the day. Like, Drew Holiday is a drastically different player than Russell Westbrook, and that's okay. It's just that Drew Holiday and his game is tailor-made to play with superstars, because he can shoot off the dribble, he can shoot off the catch, he is a phenomenal defender, he is a completely unselfish player, all of that. Russell Westbrook defensively has all of the tools to be a great player, but throughout his career has been more of a gambler that has tried to start transition opportunities, and has been more of a he's willing to leave his man in order to chase rebounds kind of guy. And in Oklahoma City built a scheme around that for it to be successful. Like, Steven Adams is one of the best players in the NBA at boxing out. And they essentially had Russ crash every time on the defensive glass to start the early offense by getting the ball, grabbing and going. And he was such downhill force at that point that it made sense to do that. And now that's just not going to be the case anymore. And you're not going to build a defensive scheme around Russ's deficiencies and around his strengths, frankly. You're going to have to make him work within the scheme. And I just don't know if any real team is going to want to do that. Like, the level to which the Lakers were better defensively with Austin Reeves out on the court defensively this year was very high. Like, Austin Reeves just knows where he has to be all the time. He's really smart. He's really intuitive. You look at their tools, like, Austin Reeves doesn't have half of the tools physically that Russell Westbrook does, but he has the biggest one, which is up here in terms of his brain, in terms of the way that he thinks the game through. And I think Russ has always been like a really underrated basketball IQ guy. I think that throughout his career, like, he is just kind of a basketball savant that knew how to make things work, especially out in transition and out in the open court. But he doesn't have the athletic tools to fall back on anymore. And I think that Austin Reeves and guys like that just make it work a little bit more defensively, in part because of effort as well. Like, let's just be real with it. Russ's effort defensively at times can wane.